This is the Lean Construction Blogs Podcast, a podcast dedicated to stories, case studies, and lessons learned of applying lean construction from around the world. Join Dick Beyer as he interviews industry leaders, lean construction practitioners, and subject matter experts to help you improve the build environment in general and your design and construction projects in particular. Advance your lean journey and bring your continuous improvement efforts to the next level. Let's get started.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be in the world. This is the leanconstructionblog.com podcast with Dick Beyer, and that's me. Today, we are joined by one of my closest friends in the community and one of the leaders who has inspired lots of people in their lean journey. She is a veteran of the California Prison Healthcare Receivership, which is the croix de guerre in our community, and she has worked through not only engineering and delivering projects and lean and LCI things and communities of practice, but now she works for an owner. She works for Merck down in North Carolina. So she transported herself from California out to North Carolina and has been busily raising her daughter, going to law school, helping Merck conquer the world with all these things that we actually need to save the planet. So without further ado, let's introduce Katherine Copeland. Good morning, Ms. Copeland.
Good morning, Mr. Beyer. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you. Actually, we're all happy to have you. So your journey in lean started probably as a child when you looked around the neighborhood and said, wow, there's a lot of waste here. What could we do to get better about this? But somewhere early on, you decided to go to engineering school. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in a household where my dad owned a construction company, and I was one of 5 children. So a lot of the kids helped out around the construction company. We would, when we were younger in the winter, there'd be a lot of snow plowing and shoveling. So we would actually go out and shovel and plow, and we do paperwork and answer phones, and just learned a lot about the construction process. And I remember some of the early days in my dad's shop looking at, I guess my brain is kind of wired in a lean way because I'd look at how things were organized and try and think about ways to better organize parts so that the shop would be more efficient. And
wow,
so I feel like
5Sing even before you knew what 5S was.
Exactly. It wasn't even a thing back then, but just made things go a lot smoother. And I always hate when you have to spend a lot of time looking for something.
I still do that. I've been in this community for 18 years and I can never find a pair of scissors. So yeah. I'm with you. So that moved you towards engineering school? Is that the...
Yeah. So I decided to go into engineering school, and my grandmother went to Penn State. She went in 1932 before women even went to college, and she graduated valedictorian.
Wow.
So yeah, I have her diploma on the wall in my office.
She was setting the bar high already.
Yeah, she did. She did. So it was a real honor to follow her to Penn State. And I was looking into construction management because I really like the idea of managing construction. And Penn State had a great architectural engineering management program. And I felt really happy to be accepted to that. I looked up, actually, North Carolina A&T here has a great program. And also there was a program down in Texas that was really good also. So I thought that would be a great way to have a little bit of creativity with the architectural end of things, but then the more engineering. So you're trying to get out of those silos and look across the entire project and put all of the pieces together. Because as we know, the more we can look at buildings holistically, the more efficient our designs and our construction can be.
There's always an end game, right? At some point. So
yes.
it's not to create a plan. The end game is actually to create a building. So I think that's interesting. And Victor Sanvito was the head of that program at the time that you went to Penn State?
Yes, he was. Yeah. And a lot of people that I still work with in the industry were in that program back then. So it really was a great feeder program into the industry. But, it's funny that you mentioned the end game because I had a lot of connection with the architectural school. And I remember back in college, I actually had a debate with my friend who was an architect about whether a design could be great if it could not be built. And that conversation stayed with me for a long time because, of course, I was on the side of if it can't be built, it is not by definition a great design. And he disagreed with me. But it's good to be around people that really force you to think big.
Well, when we were both in California, I should have introduced you to my friend Eric Owen Moss, who is a legendary architect for designing things that can't be built. And he works with like one or two very small construction companies, and they always figure out a way to build it. It's like the floating clouds in the Avatar Pandora homeland at Disney. I remember that that team took a long time to try to figure out how to build that, and it was a really incredibly brilliant steel structural engineer who figured out how to do something that looks like floating clouds that still had walkways necessitated by Disney's safety standards. So it's
The
cool.
power of the and, right?
Yeah, it is one of those. It is one of those great debates. I mean, I think about buildings as the first thing they have to do is work, and there's something really elegant about a building that works. So if you want to make it work, I mean, nobody, if you were God, and I believe God's a woman if she's out there. You wouldn't invent humans by using a Barbie doll and then trying to stuff a bunch of stuff inside, right? You would start inside with the systems and you would work out, and then the building itself would reflect how well those systems work. But I got chastised for that position at one LCI conference by Bruce Cousins, who said, well, that's putting lipstick on a pig. And I said, yeah, but being able to create a pig is a pretty cool thing. Just think of all the things a pig does.
I don't know that I would agree that it's putting lipstick on a pig. It's like I said, that the power of the and. It's starting with the inside and figuring out what you really need, and then having the skill and the ability to make it beautiful. And so, I ask a lot of questions at work about, can we do things that seem like they don't go together, and can we do them really well? And I think that power of the and, I think that comes from Will Lichtig. He said that a lot at CPR, and it really stuck with me. Like, it needs to be low cost and high value. And if you can really push the power of the and, you get much better solutions than if you just focus on one side.
Yeah, it's that and conversation. And yet the industry kind of pushes us to, especially things like higher education or city oversight, right? The first thing they wanted to see are elevations for the board of trustees. And so it kind of forces you to figure out what the outside is going to look like without figuring out what the inside's, how it's going to work. And it puts pressure on those systems. I remember at the University of Chicago, it was a Genie gang design. And in order to hit budget, the developer and the contractor decided they needed to take 2 inches out of this floor to ceiling height. And by that magic, then they reduced square footage. And so their benchmark square footage went down to them at the budget. But of course, it made it almost impossible to install all the mechanical equipment because 2 inches is critical, actually, as it turns out.
Yeah, I spent many years as a mechanical engineer. And so every time they would shorten the floor height, it was just such a struggle to get the systems in and get them in efficiently.
Right. So you graduated from Penn State and you were a proud Nittany Lion.
I am.
And you was your first job with Southland Industries?
It was. I did some internships. I actually went up to Boston as an intern and worked for a company called Beacon Construction. Did my thesis on a Beth Israel hospital, which had a really innovative, Beacon Construction was doing some innovative stuff back then with up-down construction. And so they would pour a slab on grade and then go up with a superstructure and simultaneously go down for underground parking, because we all know how congested Boston can be. So that internship was a really good experience to learn about how to innovate within the construction industry. And I value that internship quite a bit. But when I graduated, I realized that the most for me, one of the more challenging parts of the building was the mechanical and electrical systems. And if I could go to work for a company that specialized in those areas and learn as much as I could about those intricate systems, I could be much more effective as a builder long term. So that's why I decided to go to Southland.
Well, and Southland was a real pioneer in design build in the mechanical space. I mean, I think along with the MC Deans of the world and the Rosen guys.
Rosen. Yes.
Rosen, yeah. I just get stuck at Rosen. And TD Industries in Texas. I mean, a lot of these folks understood that being able to design what you're actually installing meant that you were saving all of those conversations, all of that crosstalk that happens between consultants. And there's very few design builders in Canada. As a matter of fact, I can't name one. And that becomes an issue in terms of just how long it takes to get the trades talking with the consultants. And under the contractual hierarchy, that's one of the nice things about IPD is that we have been able to sit the trades with the consultants, and that has and we've had some great success stories there. So you went to Southland. Did you move to California right away?
I did move to California, and
for a girl growing up in Connecticut, that was always your dream, right? Move backwards one state.
Well, I definitely wanted to see more of the United States than just one state. So it was a big move. And I was actually put on a project. You may have heard of this. It's the Beverly Hills Hotel in Beverly Hills, California.
Oh, yes, darling, of course. Taken, not stirred, please.
They were renovating the hotel, and it was a really interesting experience because I find renovations to be quite challenging. They have a lot more constraints on them and they require a lot more innovation. I believe the Beverly Hills Historical Society said that in the Polo Lounge, we were more than welcome to remove the ceiling and the ductwork above the ceiling, but we must leave the diffusers in place. So a lot of fun challenges.
Well, you can imagine I'm working on the renovation of the Center Block in Ottawa, which is the Canadian Parliament building. Mm-hmm. And it was built after a fire in 1917 in the Beaux-Arts tradition, but so much of it is building science from 1917. And now you're trying to update the building, but it's Canada's favorite building. So the heritage part of it is huge. And everybody has an opinion, right? So there's the National Capital Commission, and there's all of these oversight agencies that all have something to say about what you're doing. So the mechanical system was particularly difficult because there's heritage walls, there's no room for it. Right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? So did you move to Garden Grove, home of Sublime?
I did, yeah. I lived right in Signal Hill.
Perfect. All right, so you're working out of Garden Grove, you're working on the Beverly Hills Hotel. Did you get to stay there for free?
No. Oh, I did have an office. My office was in one of the bungalows, but
one of the cabanas, or were they called bungalows?
No, they're bungalows, and
okay.
They've got all kinds of crazy stories. The people who worked at the hotel for a long time could tell us great stories.
So when did you start thinking about lean in connection with, as a formal thought rather than I'm going to organize Dad's shop because this is just ridiculous?
So I was very fortunate that Southland got involved with the Lean Construction Institute right as Greg and Glenn were starting the institute in 1998. So, and then at that point, the focus was on the last planner system. And so I was working, I remember very distinctly in 1998, I was actually in DC working on a office building, Worldgate, in the Herndon area. And so my foreman and I was a project engineer or project manager on this project. And my foreman and I decided we would roll out the last planner. And it was really only within our company. So we had our 3-week look ahead, and we actually just put together the 3-week look ahead. And, it was like about our communication and getting more reliable with our workflow. So I would better understand where he was going, and I could make sure that all the constraints were removed. I had the material that he needed. I had the information he needed. And it was, step one in using the last planner system. And I remember at times I would think and we would say back and forth, this isn't rocket science. This is what we normally do in our head. We're just making it more transparent so we have better communication. And so a lot of the fundamentals of lean and last planner I don't really consider them to be that outside the box. It's more about better relationships and better communication and really being transparent in where we're doing what we're doing so that we can help each other.
Well, I think one of the things about innovation is it's not just something entirely new. It's doing the same thing in different ways, right? It's figuring out new ways of doing that. And I think you hit right on it. The most important part that I find that people don't understand about the last planner system or don't do effectively is that weeks 4, 5, and 6, that week 4, 5, and 6 look ahead, that's really where the project manager lives.
Yeah.
Because that's the make work ready part. And if work is not ready to be delivered when it needs to be, then we have workers waiting for work and we have work waiting for workers, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's the novel thing about this, and yet everybody's always focused on that, like 3 weeks. And I'm working on a project right now where we're taking all day on Tuesday to rationalize where design is because they have such a hard time keeping up with construction because it's just a shotgun of demands and requests, and nobody understands that actually those should be thought of way down the line, way before we get here. So we're gonna finally just do our phase planning design for all of the deliverables that need to release work for the entire first phase so we can get caught up and get rational. So you were in DC, you were hanging out at the White House, enjoying all the benefits of the Clinton administration or whatever. So you started doing the last planner system, and that was the first thing inside of Southland that you did. What other, did that spark you to think about other kind of lean construction things? Did you, certainly you went to the congresses that we had back in those days, which was, a group of middle-aged hippies in Birkenstocks and sweaters that smelled like wood burning fires in Boulder, where we all told stories, which was an awesome time. But how much further did you get into it before you went to CPR?
So I will tell you a funny story. So I went to all the congresses. I was there when Greg would use his duck call to bring us all back. And I remember Southland put together a conference and they had Greg and Glenn come in and they were doing the Parade of Trades with us, or I'm sorry, the Parade of Trades, and it was the dice game. So you would have weighted dice and you would roll the dice. And we were in Vegas, that it happened to be in Vegas, and I was the leadoff person on my team, and I managed to roll a 1 every single time. So in terms of understanding flow, if you're rolling a 1 every single time, there's nobody on your team that's happy with you.
Right.
So that experience really resonated with me, the importance of flow and making sure that we were moving things forward. So I would say within Southland, we really pushed very hard to implement last planner throughout our organization. And then as we started to grow, we wanted to create a lean culture within the company. And I think that's really important because you hear owners talking about, we want companies that are lean. And we don't just want companies that understand how to do last planner or one particular tool or how to use a particular tool. We actually want companies that understand the lean culture. So even within Southland, we were doing things like, how do we make our office more efficient? How do we do value? We actually did some value stream maps on our process. Especially we did a lot of manufacturing. And so we look at how do we create lean flow from design through detailing out into our shop? How do we create visual cues? We had this great board, our shop in Garden Grove had this board up, and you could see, and I could go out into the shop and see for the next 3 weeks exactly what was going to flow through our shop. So I think it's really important when you start your lean journey, not just to focus on your projects, but also to focus on your organization and make sure that your organization has a lean mindset and doesn't just focus on tools.
Well, and one of the great benefits of that is that you can begin to lower your costs. You can benefit projects by doing the same work in less time because you've taken that space between work away, which is really the key. I mean, work just takes what work takes, right? And you can do takt time studies and maybe you can make it faster. But if you create the flow is what enables you to take the space out between the work. And that means that you can do more work in less time because you're concentrated just on the value add items that we're trying to do. And I think it's particularly, so I don't want to say it's easy, but I do think that the mechanical trades and electrical trades, the ones that do fabrication directly from plans, really mechanical. If you go right to the plasma cutter from the model, and it's always seemed to me to be a better fit for understanding production than it is necessarily with GCs who really don't understand really very much about production. And don't care about production, right? There
are a lot of GCs that are getting a lot better in that arena where they're really focusing on creating that flow and like actually helping the teams work together and foster the communication between the parties so that we actually create flow. Because that's where Nirvana is. Like a really good lean general contractor is one that can figure out how to manage the relationships between the contracts.
They're celebrating back there. All the chipmunks are up.
Yes. I apologize for the background noise.
Awesome. No, say hi to Nikki. No problem. So from there, when you started thinking about these things, and how did you get on the CPR team that was the Southland representative?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm not sure I remember. I had, I'd been very involved with LCI. I was part of the Southern California community of practice at that point. And Southland got invited to be part of CPR with DPR construction. And I guess I must have been in the right place at the right time. And my boss at the time said, would you be willing to do this project? And it's in Sacramento. I was living in Southern California and the project is in Sacramento. So it required travel every week up to Sacramento. And I was fortunate that I was in a position where I could do it. And it was really just one of those opportunities that really can kind of like push your career in a certain direction, because we always talked about it as drinking from a fire hose, but everybody that was there, their lean knowledge went from wherever it was just up like 7 or 8 notches, because there was just this complete and total immersion. And I always look back at it, and that's where, target value delivery and choosing by advantages and use of A3s really became part of my DNA.
Right. So it was, so when you first accepted the assignment, as I remember the structure, you were probably told, well, it's going to be 3 months and then we all come home, or 4 months or whatever. And we're all going to come home and we're going to design some stuff. And then somebody will get the first project and we'll just move forward. And then some wacky guy like me said, well, I'm not sure we should be giving this to the best team because there's people on each team that we like. Why don't we just select an all-star team? And we selected people from every team, and those were the people who came back. And that 4 months suddenly turned into, well, for me, that 4 months turned into 19 months. And for you, I'm sure it turned into close to a year.
Yeah, it was definitely a year for me.
Or whatever. And, but like you said, I think it's the best education people could get, because we actually had to do it. We we didn't have the luxury to talk about it. We were actually applying those principles to the design of these, prototypes.
Well, and I think what was important about that project is we took the time, and this is something I think that people need to think about on their own projects. We took the time at the beginning of that project to create relationships between the parties and to get to know each other and to understand how we work together. And that time that we invested in building the relationship, but and it was really uncomfortable. Like we were telling people, don't put pencil to paper, don't draw anything, get to know each other, set up process, set up how you're going to work together. And it was incredibly uncomfortable. And we all had to lean into that discomfort. But the time that we invested in the relationships and the work process was so valuable because it allowed us to figure out how target value delivery was going to work and how we were going to come up with big ideas and really test those big ideas to create better solutions. And I see it all the time. Projects, like we get, teams get the project and the next day they have drawings and they're starting to sketch, and they don't stop and pause to take the time to figure out how to be a high performing team.
Right. I think that teaming was important, and we learned how difficult it is. It's often hard for teams to come together on early protocols. So you have an IPD project and everybody's going, oh, this is great. We have an IPD project. What do we do? I say, well, the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out how to share our documents. Oh no, I have Procore and I have, Silliware and I've got, Gate 9 or whatever. And everybody has their own kind of proprietary software that's been designed to manage change orders and site instructions and submittals, and really isn't very good for us. But at CPR, we asked all of the architectural firms, and with all the specialty consultants in healthcare and justice, we must have had 20 or 25 different architectural firms. And then we had the designers like your firm and the others that were there. And we said, okay, we're all going to hook up to one big computer system and you're going to share all your files. And they started freaking out. But if you remember, yeah. So I think we probably had 200 square feet for a data room, and that suddenly grew into 1,000 square feet. And just organizing the process and getting the tables and figuring out how the space should work. And I still think that's one of the most dynamic big rooms I've ever been in, because we used whiteboards as creating spaces. We had data drops on plastic tables. Nobody had an office. Each of the teams had an office for managing the stuff they needed to do, but everybody was out on the floor all the time, which was really unique. And this was back in the day where Wi-Fi wasn't very effective, so we had data drops and all the rest of that stuff, right, if you recall.
Yeah.
So what were your big takeaways from CPR, other than these enduring friendships? I mean, I'd say the number one takeaway for me is just how many friends I have in the community, and I'm proud to include you in that, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah. I mean, number one was the relationships and the people that I met at CPR and that I learned with. I still turn to, and when I'm facing a problem, I'm trying to figure out how to teach people TVD, I will call some of those people and ask them. In addition to that, the idea of target value delivery, because that's the arena I work in the most right now, the big ideas. And I was just on a call on Friday where I was talking to teams about, they were expressing to me and they were saying, well, we're really struggling because we feel like the designers are asking us to tell them what they want and then they'll go design it. And so we talked about the idea of, instead of saying what you want, let's talk instead about the problems we're trying to solve. Like, what are the things that are really in conflict with each other? And if we can solve both of the problems together, we can get a more effective design. So, and that leads into those big ideas. So, really teaching teams to think about the big ideas and think outside the box. Stan Shu taught me, have those big, crazy ideas, not because they will be the solutions that get implemented necessarily, but because they will force you to find better solutions than you would have found if you hadn't tested big ideas. I also learned a lot about conceptual estimating, being able to come up with early numbers and making sure that instead of estimating drawings that were complete, I actually could start to think in terms of what are the things that start to drive the cost in a design. And if I can tell the design team what those are, and we can manage to specific quantities or specific ideas, we can be sure that the solution that we provide will fit the cost model that's appropriate for the project. Because, we have to start thinking in terms of, cost is an input to design. And if we try and design outside of that bubble of cost, we can get great designs, but we can't afford them. So I met some really great designers that were willing to think differently and come up with solutions that fit into the cost model, which is important.
Yeah, I think this is at the essence of what target value delivery means to be, because what we typically do is we'll say to our mechanical consultant, well, just tell us what the system is going to be, rather than, and the easiest thing for them is a vertical strategy. So let's just go up and we'll have a vertical strategy. And so that completely discounts common trade racking and all of the efficiencies that we can save. So what's easiest for you may not be best for the team, may not fit the cost model. And that's why you have to work with everybody else to say, what are the significant cost drivers that we have? And on construction, since materials are about 50% and labor is about 50%, you can have the greatest influence on labor. And contractors, for some reason, always think, well, we'll just use cheaper material and then that'll drive the cost down. And as I said, it drives the cost down to some degree in some places, but that's not where your big bang is. Your big bang is you have people on time and materials, right? So the great lesson of Parkland Hospital was that unless the owner has people on time and materials, the owner can't take advantage of all the savings that we get through the last planner system and creating the flow. So on that project, we thought we would have 2,000 people on that job every single day, and we never had more than 1,400. But because those were lump sum contracts, the owner never got the benefit of that. MC Dean was really happy with that. Johnny Cochran, you probably know Johnny Cochran at MC Dean. He was really happy with that. But really, to extend those benefits to the owner, you have to have people on time and materials. But then that also means you have to be able to manage people on time and materials, and you have to be able to say to some certain people, go home. If we have the project architect here, we don't need a CA. We don't need a spec book if, in fact, we're designing what we're buying in design, right? Yeah. So, where are the things that we always do that we can get away from, even on top of how do we manage big ideas and cost drivers and things like that? So once you were done at CPR, once we had to face the brutal reality that we weren't going to be able to build these prototypes, at least I was able to go on with the Clark McCarthy team and the HDR folks and do the Stockton facility, which was 2,500 beds. But the things we learned, so the guy who ran that program for the state, Mike, who was from the Department of Corrections and had been coming, Mike Merriweather, I think, or something like that. He decided, and Bill Proctor decided that, well, we're not going to be able to get an IPD through the legislature, so let's just do a design build. But because of all the work we had done on that project, which turned out to be $600 million, I think 680, something like that, from the opening of design to the first prison bed was occupied was like 23 months. And I remember there was 1 month when Dan went up and did stickies on the wall, and they did $60 million of construction in a single month.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Pretty amazing. So the legacy of that, of the CPR, is in delivering prison healthcare in California at that Stockton facility. And the legacy is all of us out there doing our stuff. So when you left CPR, what were the next projects that you did, and how did you kind of enhance the lean growth of of Southland, because you certainly had a willing victim in Southland. Victor believed in it, and the company believed in it, I think, down the line, right?
Well, it's, you'll probably remember this. I came off of CPR and I went back down to the San Diego area, and Sharp Healthcare was looking at doing IPD. And they had an owner's rep who had come in, and she was a big thinker. And so she was starting to look for self-organized teams that would execute projects within the Sharp Healthcare system. And it was great because we actually took some people from the CPR project, and CPR had 3 big teams, but actually the general contractor that was on a different team reached out to me based on our relationship from CPR and said, hey, Sharp is looking to do IPD. And they had an RFP, and I'm always a big fan of these. The RFP said, go ahead and select your team. Take, your general contractor, your architect, your trade partners, come together and do one proposal to us. So that takes a ton of waste out, because we spend tons of money bidding to, 20 different parties on a construction project. So they said, self-organize your team, and here's some bridging documents, but tell us what you can do. And so we got together in an RYA's architectural office in San Diego. And we really focused on the owner's value proposition. This is it was a renovation of an emergency department. And it was one of the most busy emergency departments in all of San Diego. It was in Chula Vista. And we knew that the owner had value in the number of beds they could put into this. The other thing was we had to keep the existing ED operational throughout the whole thing. We're going to have to cut down their beds for a period of time, but we had to keep it operational. So when we thought about the owner's value proposition was, first, minimize the disruption to the existing facility, and second, add as many beds as you can. And so the whole team organized around those value principles. And the bridging documents had a certain number of beds, and they assumed that you would have to have 3 licensing phases. So the project would, go through 3 phases and then license 3 separate times. And our team came up with a way to add beds and reduce the number of phases in the project, which shortened the overall schedule and reduced disruption to the emergency department. And that was just through innovating. And one of the best stories, and I use this all the time, is we were sitting in the office together as a team, and we had come up with a way to add more beds to the facility. And we were talking it through, and the electrician was sitting over there, and he said something, and he's like, we've been talking all this time about the 3 phases, but the 3 phases was based on this. And when you added the additional beds, you got rid of that constraint. And the constraint had nothing to do with electrical. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it didn't have anything to do with electrical. And it was like this light bulb moment in the room. We all realized we had done something good, and we were able to reduce our number of phases. He pointed it out, like having all that smarts in the room and, looking at things from different perspectives. We would have missed it if he hadn't pointed it out.
Was that the Chula Vista project where they
Yes.
she had a deadline for OshPod,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to meet that stuff? Because I was on that team as well. So,
You were. It was a great project.
That was wonderful. It's funny that you said the light bulb moment and referred to the electrician. Does it ever bother you that people don't go, we had a window air conditioning moment? Or the drywaller, we had a smooth mud moment. It's always that light bulb. Those darn electricians,
They always have the good ideas.
I know.
Yeah, but we went into that interview, and when we mentioned more beds and less licensing, I think that was one of the only times I've walked out of an interview feeling like, 99% certain we had the job.
Yeah, I love that too. Although it's so much better if people just call you up and say, okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
Right. Okay, so that's one of those great examples. Now you've continued to do your lean. You continued to do work for Southland in North Carolina, and then you decided to go to law school. And then all of a sudden, two of the real, this is like a baseball trade where Steven Strasburg and Babe Ruth are traded to the Yankees, where you and Jessica Kelly came into Merck kind of simultaneously to really help them with their stuff. I mean, that was a huge loss for Southland, I'm sure. But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Merck is really trying to figure out how to deliver assets more reliably at a lower cost, because there's a lot of cost pressure, and it's important that we are able to provide life-saving drugs to patients and drive down that cost and get the drugs to market much faster. So Merck decided to put together an office that would, coach all of their projects and really kind of find best practices and make sure we're implementing lean across our projects very effectively. And the thing I like most about it was a lot of companies will add one lean leader and ask that one person to try and spread lean throughout the organization. And Merck did it a little differently. They put together a whole office with people focused on different things. So I focus on target value delivery, and Jessica focuses on teaming. And we have another gentleman by the name of Mark Mythen who focuses on last planner and tact. And it's really good because each of us can speak and understands the other elements of lean, but it's good to have people in different areas so you can really focus on those parts and drive that within the organization. So of course you have to have that lean culture. That's the foundation. And then once you have that foundation of a lean culture, you can start to build on that foundation with target value delivery and designing for construction. So using that schedule of what you want to deliver to understand how you're going to design the facility. I think that's a real big thing, big change of mindset that people need to think about. A lot of times we think of design and then construction as two decoupled. But on a real lean project, you start with the end in mind. You figure out what you need to achieve, and then you actually structure your design to meet those needs. And that was a lot of what we did at, Sharp Chula Vista together. We figured out how we needed to turn over the building, and then our designers actually worked the design to release work as it was necessary so that we could hit all of our OSHPA deadlines and all of our licensing deadlines. And they didn't think in terms of design packages. They thought in terms of what's the information I need to give so that I can release work downstream.
Yeah, I remember it was one of the first times that we had done a pull plan in kind of last planner for design, right? The kind of information exchange. It was really robust. I thought that was terrific. But so at Merck, I think everyone would agree that, especially after the last 2 years, that getting product to market as soon as it's been invented is a key goal of our pharmaceutical industry in the state. So I'm proud that Merck has been working on the edges of lean for a long time. Yes. I know I've been down there a few times, and Christian I think's been in there a few times, and people have been helping. But I think this is really good news from my perspective that they have figured out how to get a team or a branch or a department essentially that's all in.
Yeah.
And that the success is based on not hiring outside consultants, but is homegrown, and everybody's totally invested in what the outcome is. So what have you now that you're on the inside at the owner's side?
Yes.
And you guys don't do much building on your own, I take it. Although I'm sure you do a slew of designing. How have you found the reception to what you're doing, A, in the industry, or B, have you decided we're just going to have our own construction teams, we're just going to go after this, we're going to be like that company in the Bay Area that did everything virtually and ended up going bankrupt, but it was quite an interesting kind of concept. So how have you and Jessica and Mark been able to kind of change the way that Merck looks at the market, and how has the market reacted?
Well, yeah, and I should say I mentioned my co-coaches, but also George Cusack. he's kind of our architect and our thought architect, and he's really kind of putting the pieces together. And he's
George is great.
Yeah.
How about Al? How about our good buddy?
Al's fantastic. He's leading several projects that are really pushing the envelope in terms of what we're doing. So we have a bunch of coaches, and then we just have some phenomenal people within the organization that are willing to do, try new things. And like the themes are the same throughout. You have to have good teammates. And so you want to make sure that as you're doing this, you're selecting partners that have that lean culture. Going back to what I was saying with Southland, like building that lean culture within the organization, because it's really easy to go into an interview and say, yeah, we can do TACT, or yeah, we can do this. But it's completely different when your company is built on that. So we want to have relationships and partnerships with companies that think the same way. And so I think, within the lean community, there are just a lot of good companies that have transformed their internal company culture to be lean. And just like CPR, when you can put together a lot of good companies that think the same way, and it's not just companies, it's people. This is, a lot about people, and you get people that are willing to think differently and try new things and be reflective, because when you try new things, there will be failures, and you have to identify when things are going wrong and then adjust and pivot and figure out how to get them back on track. And that's not always easy. Sometimes it's hard to say, this experiment that I thought was a great idea is really not a great idea.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the whole, people forget that it's, we're the plan, do, check, and act cycle, that architects and designers are pretty good at planning. The contractors are pretty good at doing. The inspectors are pretty good at checking, but very few people are good at adjusting.
Yeah.
Right. Accepting that, well, that didn't work very well. And it's almost like, a football analogy. You come out in the second half after you've looked at the first half and you've completely changed your game plan, because now you're adjusting to the things that you've seen in the first half. And, if we had that kind of mentality that we were thinking about, we're constantly tweaking the system to get better, rather than, I'm glad we decided on that process,
Well, and that's why, so within Merck, we call ourselves coaches. And I think it's like the best term for what we do, because—
You have a whistle and a hat?
They took my whistle away. But you do have to make adjustments. Like, you're in there and you're trying something and it's not quite working. You're like, okay, we got to make a game time adjustment. Like, we got to call some different plays. So, and what's nice is we build a lot of that, and we build a lot of facilities. And so we're constantly learning and adjusting. And so, I can do a TBD kickoff for a project and say, oh, well, that the first part of that was really good on culture, but we didn't get deep enough into the values of the project. So how can we structure things so that the team has a better understanding of the project values, which allows them to come up with better solutions? So there's this constant, like you said, it's important that we build into our systems that learning loop. And that was something I think we did really well at CPR. I remember Kristen Hill was involved, and we did some reflections. And we took the time to, and it's not easy, but took the time to say, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and this is how we can adjust moving forward.
Yeah, so I think that, I talk about this stuff as a very linear kind of process. You start with transparency and visibility, and then you move to collaboration, because you can, it's hard to collaborate with somebody who's not open and transparent, right? So you move to collaboration. Collaboration builds trust. Trust allows you to make commitments made, commitments done, allow you to achieve stuff. But underneath that whole thing is the knowledge piece, that you're constantly gaining knowledge and refreshing the system. And most systems don't have that kind of refreshment piece to them, right? Where they don't refresh the screen, often enough. So do you, in your procurement, do you still go to RFPs, or do you have a bidding process where people compete, and has that competition gotten Has the way that you analyze teams competitively changed, or have you gone to just relationships where you go, we love this team, we're in this area, let's go?
We have built a panel of contractors that work with us consistently, and we are working with them to build lean on the projects. So what's nice is some of the companies that we work with actually have lean coaches in-house similar to us. And we've got this network of lean coaches within the different companies. So each company is on their own lean journey, and then you've got our lean journey, and we're trying to parallel those two paths and make sure that they're headed in the same direction and that we're learning from each other. So, this is what we are trying to do, and this is what target value delivery and project production management means within Merck. And this is how we do it within Merck. And then we also, this is what they're seeing, because they've got they're learning from other projects, and we want to try and gather that learning. But then we also want to learn together on our projects. And using the same companies is valuable, because then if they go from one project to another, you can have that reflection and say, okay, on the last project, here are the elements that worked. This is what we want to move forward, but here are some of the areas where we still need to improve. So I've always said that, the nirvana, right, in lean would be if you could actually do a really good lean project and then just take that entire team and move them to the next project, because then you don't have to have that forming stage. I don't know where, I don't think we're there yet as an industry, but we're starting to see trends in that same direction.
And are there ways that new people can break into that group? I mean,
absolutely.
Constantly looking for, do you have a draft every year where you kind of look at, well, these are our prospects, let's get bailiwick construction in here, because they seem to have a high on-base percentage,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, it's fantastic. So what would you like, how would you like the industry? So I think of this, just like you do, as the built environment. I don't think of this as programming, design, construction, operation, maintenance, tear down. I think that's the seamless life of a project, right? That you should be thinking about how you're going to tear this thing down at the time that you're building it, because at some point it's going to be either repurposed or torn down, or something's going to happen to it. So there is a life cycle of these facilities. And I think about, how we do it better. And I think actually of TVD as designing to constraints. So I think of these things as, cost is a constraint, schedule might be a constraint, quality might be a constraint. We do a lot of work up here in the educational sphere. And so August is always the deadline. I mean, you just know that the schedule is August, right? So,
yeah.
So given those kinds of things, how would you, so if I'm a contractor out there, or I'm an owner, or I'm a designer, what is your recommendation to folks on how to get into doing the kind of work that you guys do, developing yourself so that you're eligible for that kind of stuff, and actually making the built environment better by improving your own culture and the way that you do things?
Well, that's a lot of questions all at once.
Well, it's really a supply chain issue, right? Like, how do we build a lean supply chain? Because we've always had that issue with, there's just not enough folks, who have the right kind of teaming idea around this to do it. But I mean, you seem to have fixed that to some degree. But how would you advise sectors in our built environment industry about what they should start doing and what they should stop doing and what they should keep doing?
Well, okay. So I would first start with build the culture within your own organization. Don't focus on, or focus more on making it part of your internal company DNA. You'll understand it better. You'll have a deeper understanding of how it works. So I think that first and foremost, rather than trying to do what you think the customer is looking for first, focus on building it within your own organization. And then I would say, try to understand the customer's value proposition. What provides value to your customer? And the customer isn't always the owner. Sometimes as a trade partner, the customer might be the general contractor. Try to understand the owner's value proposition. And a lot of times it's easy to, like, a lot of times owners don't even know what they want, right? So they'll say, I need X. And you really want to be curious and dig into, why do you need X? What are the constraints around X? And really understand the problem statement. So when I would work at Southland, I'd work with a lot of different customers, and I would try and understand what provided customer value. And I was always very curious about their business, and I'd want to understand their business, because sometimes as it came out, they'd say, well, we need an air handler to do this. And then when you dug into it, it turned out they didn't really need an air handler. They needed dehumidification, or they needed something entirely different. But you had to understand what was going on in their value proposition to understand that. So try and dig deep into what the owner wants. And just because the owner says, I want this, don't be afraid to ask questions about, why do you want this? What are the problems that you're seeing? Like, owners will say, I need N+1. Well, explain to me why you need N+1. What are the things that what's behind that? And try and peel back the layers of the onion and understand that, because that's where you'll come up with better solutions. Those would be two big things that I'd say is build the culture within your own organization, and then strive to understand your owner and their true underlying problems. And then don't be afraid to be innovative with those problems, and think about, okay, I know you asked me to give you N+1, but what I heard was you have this problem. So here are some other solutions, and propose those solutions. And I would say, as teams, when you form the teams, start to focus on your pull plans for the team and figure out, like, when you need to make decisions, and give the design teams time to ideate and think. One of the things that's a struggle on construction projects is we try and move so fast into construction that we don't spend time to ideate and think. And I've actually had some teams where we really had to say, like, they're like, if we don't make a decision today, we won't hit the schedule. And if they pause and they really, I had an example on a project where there was two design options, and one side of the table really liked one, and one side of the table really liked the other, but they each hated the other solution, right? And so they're like, well, we just don't have time, so we're going to move forward with this. And the people that were going to live in this hated this. So we as a team were able to say, you know what, we're going to pause, and we're going to try and find something in the middle. And we're going to take the advantages of this side and the advantages of this side and put them together and find a solution, the hybrid solution that's better. And when you can get teams that will take that, it's like you have to lean into discomfort on that. And you have to say, we are going to stop and we're going to find the right solution, because otherwise we're going to churn later on. So ultimately it'll save you time if you pause and you really get to a good solution. But it takes a lot of leaning into discomfort to do that, because people think, oh, we're going to be late, we just have to run as fast as we can.
Yeah, there's a gene that has been put inside of contractors, especially, that you have to go. We're not going to hit the schedule, and it's like the schedule is not a sacrosanct thing. As a matter of fact, I think schedules are for bus companies, and planning is for construction. And you need to have a plan. But I also think that the true to what you said earlier about Will Lichtig and CPR, you were able to have the end conversation with that team, right? We're going to take the advantages of this, and we're going to take those things. They're not necessarily contradictory or conflicting. And the reason that we spend more time in design is because every hour spent planning saves us 4 hours in the field. So it is hard to hold the dogs back, though, when you got them mounted on the sled and they just want to go. And so, like picking up the pencil, you have to figure out when you set up the trailers, because I think that's the key release moment. Keep them in the big room a little while longer. Don't get them, mobilized on the site, because once they're on the site, then they tend to want to go.
Well, and it's been such a challenge the last 2 years, because you say big room and
Oh,
setting up the trailers, and we've had to do this with remote. And now instead of big room, it's like let's turn our cameras on, let's look at each other, let's talk about these things, let's set up meetings where we understand this isn't a decision meeting, this is an ideation meeting. So you have to be very specific about what we're doing in these meetings,
right.
so that you can, being a high performance team is just as important in the virtual environment. And it's, I would argue, harder than in person.
Oh, much harder. Because I think what happens is that in the big room, you can do a lot of things simultaneously. You can have clusters or pits or whatever you want to call them, and they can all be working at the same time. When we went remote, we tended to get very linear.
Yeah.
Everybody had to be, in the same meeting, and everybody had to discuss it. And that was not only disconcerting and inefficient, but cost a lot of money because we had lots of people there that didn't need to be there. So we've taken to using Mural, for instance, and having separate chat rooms.
Yeah.
And doing ideating in smaller groups with stickies. And then you go to each of the groups and take the stickies out that are, you get 2 from each group until you've kind of gotten all the ideas up there. But you are promoting the idea of simultaneity, that we're all working at the same time, and we're much more effective. I'm not a big fan of efficiency, but I am a fan of effectiveness, and efficiency is a part of that, right? So
Yeah.
how you do that. Well, so what's next? Are you really happy at, building this team at Merck? Is that a more participation in LCI? What's up for Katherine Copeland?
Well, continuing to learn more about target value delivery with the teams I've got some really amazing teams that are forcing me. I feel like I learn something new every single day, which is really, for me, the best part of what I do. And I have people that challenge me, and we're trying to figure out, I've spent many years doing target value delivery in hospitals, but doing target value delivery in manufacturing is not easy at all. And it has different constraints. And so trying to figure out, you have this big picture of what it looks like, and then how do you make it work effectively in a different environment? That's a constant learning experience for me. And, we've always talked about, can you do lean without the right contracts? Yes, you can, but it is so much better with the right contracts. So I'm really hopeful to see more use of integrated form of agreements, contracts. I remember when we were on CPR, we were actually writing all the exhibits to the contracts, and we were talking about what are the behaviors we want out of people. So yeah, how often do you read a contract that talks about how do we want you to work together? It always talks about what happens when things go wrong.
Right.
But what if we started to think about, this is what good looks like, and this is how we want you to behave, because we think that if you can behave in this way, we'll get the outcomes that we need.
Well, on lots of the projects that I do, we have both key performance indicators, which are things like PPC and how quickly we resolve our constraint log and how well we've done in making work ready. Those are kind of KPIs, but we also have KBIs, which are key behavioral indicators. So how is the team going? What's the trust on the team? What's the level of communication? What are the things that we need to adjust because behaviors aren't matching expectations for delivery on the project, right? The behaviors are holding us back. People, and this is, I think I had this conversation with our design and construction team on a big project I'm on just last week, where the contractor said, you designers just can't take these things personally, that they're not meant personally. And I said, well, that's a really hard thing when you say you are such a bonehead, right? Some of the behavior is being able to have candid conversations as adults without accusing people.
Yeah.
And without pointing fingers. And it's a difficult thing to learn, but I think it's absolutely key to a high performing team, is that you can't, if you make people feel defensive, they get defensive everywhere, not just on that issue. And you can't have people hiding in bunkers.
Yeah, and that's why respect for people is the number one, one of the first tenets in lean. And it's something I try and come back to. You do have to accept people where they are, But at the same time, you have to gently encourage them to think in a way that optimizes the projects. And we've been trained for so long to think about how to optimize our own piece of the pie. It's really difficult for people to think, I always try and encourage teams to organize around the project. And so we try and do project logos. And even just a simple thing of when people are introduced on a project team, we always go around and we say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I work for X. And I've tried to get teams away from that. And to, instead of saying I work for whatever, my role on this project is to come up with a mechanical solution, or my role on this project is to be the coach, to point out when we're headed in the wrong direction. And if we can get teams that can organize around the value proposition, and then we actually sit behind it with a contract that supports it, we're going to have a much more successful outcome than if everybody's just worried about their own section. But again, these are big cultural changes and they can't happen overnight, which is why you have to accept people where they are and then continue to push them in the direction we all need to go.
Yeah, I think team logos are huge, because one of the things about culture is that you have a common language. So we have a lean language that's different than the way we talk about, like earned value management is different than PPC for sure. But you also have to have artifacts, because cultures have artifacts. They have ways of teaching people, they have ways of speaking, and they have artifacts. And having a team logo is just the beginning of an artifact that represents a culture that says, I belong to this team. I have shed the shackles of Southland or the realignment group or whatever. And now I'm on this team, and we're all logoless in this room, right? One of those things, because it is important to have artifacts, and that's why people brand. That's why companies build culture around branding, and they have ways of writing emails and not writing emails, all the rest of that stuff, so that there's a consistent message. And I mean, it sounds cultish, but cult is right in there with culture, so there's a reason for that. And it's so much easier than, rather than changing the culture of BBC construction and LYZ architecture, you can create a culture on a team because everybody's fresh. Right?
Yeah. And you should. You absolutely should. It's easier if those people come in with the idea that that have that background of a lean culture, but you can absolutely do it just among the project team. And it's really great when you do that. I mean, those are the project teams we're looking for, and the project teams we want to kind of take from project to project.
Yeah. Well, speaking of taking, I've been taking up a lot of your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me.
No, this was a lot of fun. I always enjoy talking with you. So thank you.
Well, it's always great to see you, and congratulations on all the wonderful things that you're doing.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lean Construction Blogs podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word by sharing, subscribing, or leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. Remember to join us next time as we continue to lower the barriers to applying lean construction and help take your lean journey to the next level. And don't forget to visit the Lean Construction blog to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, weekly blog posts, monthly webinars, and upcoming conferences. We hope to see you on the next episode.